year from now on. I will get to host the 3MT competition. So welcome to heat number 3. We had a good time yesterday. There were some great presentations. We have 5 students who moved through to the finals, which will be held this afternoon. We know that hopefully several of you will also be competing this afternoon. But before we begin, I just want to say thank you to the Graduate Coordinator Network. We have 3 of their members with us today who are serving as judges. By the way, they are providing all the money that we're giving away, so you should be really nice to them. And also, they're your judges, so you should be really nice to them. So we will be giving some prize money away in the finals, and I'll talk about that before we start this afternoon. Most of you I've seen along the way. Some of you have come to the workshop. Some of you have participated in the dry heat. So I'm just a little bit about the competition and the rules, just to remind everybody, including the judges. And I went over sort of the format with you a little earlier today. So the important part is although there aren't a lot of people in the room this afternoon, there will be more people, but the important part is to engage with those people who are in the room, okay? And take a look at the rules. I'm not going to go over these with you because hopefully by now you've read them. And just enjoy yourself and try to relax. The judging criteria is here, comprehension and content. Hopefully your scripts are all in your head and you're ready to go. But remember that to articulate clearly so our judges can understand everything, because typically the way it works is they will go through and they will talk about each and every one of you, and if they don't understand you or you're talking too quickly, they will mention that in their deliberations. So be sure, and that's the engagement and communications piece. So the important part is that you have enthusiasm and you look like you're enjoying yourself, because if you're excited about your research, we're more likely to get excited about your research, okay? So with that being said, that's just a little motivation for you. This is what you're going for, and thank you, Graduate Coordinator Network, for that. And the People's Choice, so if you are selected for the finals, we will have an online vote, Danielle. What time period is that open for the People's Choice Award? Do we remember? Okay, so between 2:45 and 3:30, if you are in the finals, you are welcome to tell family and friends to watch and to vote for you for the People's Choice Award. So we hope that you'll do that. Last year we had a few hundred people register votes, and it was a lot of fun. Okay? Okay, so I think that's all my slides. Oh, there's our judges. So thanks again, guys. And this is heat 3, so we are going to start with David. David's here, so come on up, and whenever you're ready, you can take the floor, and the time will start.
Let's pretend that your brain is your cell phone, and it has a stroke. You would lose an app every 4 minutes. Snapchat, gone. Instagram, gone. Gmail, gone. You would lose the ability to communicate and function in ways you currently rely on. And sadly, this is what happens during a stroke. 800,000 people each year in the United States have a stroke with devastating effects. It is the #1 cause for adult disability and results in 1 in every 20 deaths in America. So what is a stroke? A stroke happens when a blood vessel in your brain becomes blocked and it starves your brain cells of the energy they need to survive. The only current treatment is a drug I like to call Drano for your braino, which flushes out the clot, but there's a very high risk for internal bleeding, and thus the drug must be administered within 3 hours after a stroke, which is very difficult, and most patients miss this time window. And unfortunately, there are no other treatments. So my PhD research focuses on developing new technologies and new treatments for stroke. The first technology I developed is a microscope that lets us see deeper into the brain. This is an image I captured of the mouse brain, where typical microscopes can only see the top layer down to the blue dotted line. My microscope lets us see 4 times deeper, down to a millimeter, and this lets me capture the entire outer layer of the mouse brain called the cortex. With this, I can test new stroke treatments, and evaluate the blood vessel growth around the stroke by comparing the treatments in healthy mice and mice who have had a stroke. So this is on the micro scale. We need to understand the microenvironment around a stroke to develop new treatments. On the other scale, we want to understand the blood flow dynamics of the entire brain. And that's the second technology I worked on, which lets us image the entire blood flow on the surface of the brain. I'm currently testing this device in clinical trials in neurosurgery at the Dell Medical School. Here's an example of clinical data where the top image is the human brain surface. This is what the surgeon usually sees. And the bottom image is the blood flow image that we can provide to the surgeon in real time, so that when an area has a reduced blood flow and is going towards a stroke, the surgeon can intervene quickly. So to summarize, the brain is very complex. If we want to develop new stroke treatments, we need to understand the microenvironments, which my microscope lets us do, as well as the large-scale blood flow dynamics, which my imaging device does. And these techniques are very complementary and let researchers like myself evaluate stroke treatments on the micro scale and evaluate their effectiveness in the clinical trials. Thank you.
Right now, across America, students are going into schools, but they are not coming out with equal outcomes. Educational inequality is a massive problem in the United States and globally. And what I did is I wanted to look at the roots. How do we get to the places we are today? So what we're doing is connecting this historical process known as colonization to the modern space. And I'm really focusing on South Texas, the Rio Grande Valley, which is the fringes of Mesoamerica, stretching from Central America all the way up into South Texas. In the first phase of colonization, you had an abundance of maize, in particular, a crop that was determined by scientists to be the most efficient way to turn the sun's energy into human nutrition. Maize was more than a food or a crop. It was part of culture, religion. The people were called the hombres de maíz. They danced in honor of their sacred madre, maize. In the second phase, theft by force from conquistadors took the maize and made it a commodity. And so too the people became a commodity who were forced to serve under the boot heel of those conquistadors who sought granos de oro, the gold of maize. In the third phase, as the commodity grew and the people grew in a commodity, the corn is what came of it. The conquistadors eliminated maize. It was multiple colors. It was all shapes and sizes. You could taste the soil from the indigenous maize, but over centuries it became simply corn, which is actually not a word for any particular crop. It just means a generic crop for a region. And so the colonized corn took over, and today 97% of all the corn grown in America is what's called corn number 2, an inedible strain designed to be injected into an industrial food process. In the fourth phase, we get the can of industrial corn, bestowed back to the original descendants of the ancestors as a gift of modern civilization, but stripped of the nutritional value of mother maize. And in the fifth cycle, as the people accumulate in urban areas, colonized, in rural enclaves, lacking the nutritional substance, corn takes over. And today we face an epidemic, a public health epidemic of obesity and diabetes-related illnesses that actually mean that a child born in the Rio Grande Valley today going into those schools is not projected to outlive their parents' lifespan. McDonald's, the Happy Meal, 50% of all calories come from corn number 2, sourced as part of this industrial food process. And the average child in the Rio Grande Valley eats one fast food meal per day, and they are dying. But it is their fault because it's an individual choice. Thank you. Oh, sure. Yeah.
That off here. Thank you. Good. Good. Turn this off. Relax just a second.
Close enough. Alone.
Hello. Judges, are you ready? Thumbs up, everybody. Okay. Alone. There you are. You're ready to go.
We're so used to having water right at our fingertips. Just think for a second, how many times a day do you casually turn on the tap? But can you imagine this whole city with no water? In just a couple of months, in what's being called Day Zero, that's going to be reality for 4 million people in Cape Town, South Africa. After 3 years of severe drought, the city's water sources have almost completely run dry, and already you can see long lines of citizens waiting in the street for water rations. Besides the water shortages, sanitation failures, disease outbreaks, and violence are expected to accompany the crisis. Now, all this is happening despite the fact that Cape Town sits right next to the ocean with a potentially unlimited supply of water from desalination. So desalination is a water treatment technology that uses membranes to remove unwanted materials like salt from seawater. Now this happens in several stages, but one main one is filtering the water through membranes that have pores. These membranes are actually very similar to coffee filters, except on a much, much smaller size scale. So as you can see on the sketch on the left, dirty water flows parallel to the surface of the membrane. Clean water can flow through the pores, while unwanted materials are ejected due to their size. Unfortunately, many of the materials in the water can interact strongly with the membrane, and rather than flowing out of the system, can clog the membrane. This shortens the membrane's lifetime, increasing the cost of the water and making the technology unviable in poorer countries. So the main goal of my research is to address this problem. Now on the top right, I show what a clean membrane looks like and what a clogged membrane looks like. And the interesting thing is that most of the materials that clog the membrane are hydrophobic or water-hating in nature. So our solution is to chemically coat the membranes with a hydrophilic material, which has a strong affinity for water. These materials, the coating then binds a layer of water molecules to the surface of the membrane, as shown on the right. And this layer actually weakens the interaction between the membrane and the clogging materials, allowing them to flow out of the system. Now, to coat the membrane, we need materials that are not only hydrophilic, but also very adhesive, robust, and non-toxic. So the cool thing is we can get inspiration from Mother Nature, and we actually use materials that have chemical properties very similar to muscles that attach to the bottom of ships and can sustain strong forces. So I'm currently developing new and improved materials for membrane coating, as well as ways to apply them more simply to existing membranes. And these advances help make water treatment technology more affordable and more accessible for poorer countries, so we can avoid seeing another Day Zero in the future. Thank you.
Can you get your microphone, please? Thank you. Hey, how are you? Judges, are we ready for Sabina? Okay, floor is yours.
Blacks in the U.S. have historically suffered health disparities. In the case of HIV, blacks are 8 times more likely than whites and 3 times more likely than Hispanics to be diagnosed with HIV and to die from AIDS-related causes. In my preliminary study of Texas residents with HIV, I found that although blacks had low survival rates in 1996, by 2013, the survival rate was 66% higher compared to whites and Hispanics. Understanding why this improvement occurred can help in the creation of other success stories for blacks. One plausible reason is that by 2013, black-friendly HIV drugs were being prescribed. Up until 2015, HIV patients were prescribed 2 main classes of HIV drugs, the reverse transcriptase inhibitors, which I will call RTIs, and the protease inhibitors, which I will call PIs. Generally, both classes are effective, but there is weak evidence suggesting that blacks may not do too well on RTIs. To strengthen this evidence, a part of my dissertation will involve pulling the results of clinical studies that compare these 2 drug classes and then testing whether differences in the number of black participants explain differences in study results. The logic behind this is that PIs should be far better in studies with mostly black participants, while the difference between PIs and RTIs should be minimal in studies with mostly non-blacks. A positive finding will affirm the current evidence and will also set the stage for a study to verify whether blacks have indeed been prescribed more PIs in recent times. Another plausible reason for improved survival in blacks is that quality of HIV care may have improved for blacks. Studies show a link between quality HIV care and improved health outcomes, such as survival. But we do not really know if there is a link between racial disparities in HIV care and racial disparities in health outcomes. My dissertation will use models to test for this link, and will also identify which quality health HIV care measure out of the existing many has the greatest impact on health outcomes. This information will then be used to design interventions to improve health equity or reduce health disparities for blacks, not only for blacks, but also for other disadvantaged groups.
How are you today? Okay, judges, let me know if you're ready. I see, yep, okay. Floor is yours.
I was 4 years old when I first went to my grandma's house in the foothills of the Himalayas. It was a beautiful British colonial house with a courtyard in the center, a backyard, and a huge mango tree. When I was a teenager, my father told me that there might be a light rail which will be constructed right across the street. I was happy that finally my grandma will be able to go to the farmer's market. 2 years ago, I went back again to the street. There was no British colonial house. There was no mango tree. There was just a big shopping mall with a light rail running just across the street. I lost the memory of the place I grew up in. There's a similar huge urban transportation project right now happening in Atlanta. This project is called the Atlanta Bedline Project. The Atlanta Bedline Project is a 21-mile light rail and trails project which will run all around the city of Atlanta. The aim of my research is to understand what are the impacts of these huge urban transportation projects on the historic and cultural resources of the city. My research will answer three main questions: what, how, and why. For the what, this summer, I walked the 21 miles of the Atlanta Bedline and recorded what are those historic resources which are present along the Bedline. For the how, I studied how are these historic resources being influenced by the Bedline. Are they being demolished? Are they just vacant? Or are they being restored? For the why, I'm trying to study what are those preservation policies, frameworks, and incentives which influence the way a historic building will be preserved or demolished. The Atlanta Bedline project is still underway and is set to get completed in 2030. Also, the work on the light rail will start in 2019. Thus, my research will be instrumental in helping the Atlanta Bedline project preserve the identity of the city and serve the local community in a much, much better way. I might have lost the memory of the place I grew up in, but through this research, I want to make sure that the children of Atlanta don't lose theirs. Thank you.
Thank you. Yesterday we had some talks about potholes and how to fix those, and now it's light rail. I think Austin should really be paying attention to some of our presentations. Audrey's going to come up.
Yeah. Thanks for having me.
Let me see if you're on. Yeah, you're on. Okay, I have 3 thumbs up, so we're ready to go. The floor is yours.
All right, so I'm here to pitch you guys a movie, right? So, I mean, filmmakers, right? Like, they don't do any research, right? They never get it right, of course. I mean, they are always thinking about imagination and all this stuff, and you know, Hollywood doesn't really do a really good job about that, right? But let me ask you something. Let me just do a little exercise here. Like, what's the first image that comes to your head when I say these words? Mexican, Colombian, Russian, American. You know, we have all these associations in our head, and they're mostly images, right? So what I'm here to pitch you guys is both my research and my project for my thesis. I'm an RTF student, and I'm doing a film, right? I'm doing a short film about a Mexican-American first-generation kid, right? So my film is about a first-generation Mexican-American that works in the cinema. He's an actor, right? He works in these movies that are called the Cine Mexicano, which are B movies, which are really, really well sold either here in the US and in Mexico. And these movies are all about narcos, criminals, thugs. Same with Narcos, you know, that series in Netflix. So he acts in these movies, and he really wants to be an actor. The tragedy is that he wants to be a superhero. He wants to go to Hollywood. He wants to make superhero movies. And all his friends bully him. Why? Have you ever seen a brown superhero? They tell him, right? So I'm here to pitch you guys my film. That's the film I'm doing. I'm making a movie about a friend of mine called Diego, that kid. And my film is about a kid who tired of working in this industry that portrays Latinos and other minorities as either everything that is bad, everything that is wrong. he's tired of that. So he buys his own camera and starts making movies, like a lot of kids nowadays, right? You can get your own camera, you can get your own stuff and do your own thing. So I'm like a big part of this. It's so the kind of film I'm making a hybrid film, right? It's a film that involves both documentary and fiction, right? So it's about that Diego, who is a real kid, who is actually working in those movies, whose life is always in danger because, you know, those movies are also not well. They don't come from good places, right? So one of the reasons that I want to make this film is because I have been doing this intense research on both identity, family representation, and immigration. And I think it's really important to convey the idea that there is people that want to do different. There are kids that want to grow up and be more than thugs, and more than criminals, and more than narcos. There are kids that want to be heroes, and we need to show those stories. So that's what my research is about, that's what my film is about. Thank you.
Andre, let me get your mic. Oh. Can't wait to see the film. Thanks.
Yeah, that was fantastic.
Okay, we have 3 thumbs up. Lucas, the floor is yours.
Okay, so over the years, I've met several people who have told me that getting oil out of the ground is relatively easy, right? So you just poke some holes in the ground and let the oil gush out. Well, it's not really that simple. When you do this, even if you do it in the most clever way possible, you punch some holes and you only get about 30% of the oil out of the ground. And this is an engineering problem because you're leaving behind 70% of the oil. And, well, this is important because people want to exploit these resources as much as they can. So for this, we have some methods collectively known as enhanced oil recovery, which consists of injecting chemicals into the ground to try and get that 70% of the oil out of there. And why do we care about this? Well, mainly for purposes of energy self-sufficiency. For example, the United States imports about 10 million barrels of oil per day. And what if we reduce that number to about 5 million barrels per day? Well, we'd probably save billions of dollars and create countless jobs, probably thousands. So people have been doing this enhanced oil recovery for decades now, but it has not always worked. And in my research, I want to address that. Why doesn't it work sometimes? So I'm conducting systematic experiments in synthetic rocks to address that question. And these rocks, we make these synthetic rocks out of materials that we know and that we can characterize very easily. For example, glass. And so in these micromodels, we conduct multi-phase experiments to simulate the enhanced oil recovery processes. These materials, these micromodels, have 2 main advantages over real rocks. One is that visualization is very easy, and we can, and this is helpful because we can characterize the mechanisms of enhanced oil recovery. And the second thing is that they have these experiments in these synthetic rocks have high reproducibility. So you can do the experiment 10, 20 times, and you'll get basically the same results. However, if you do this in real rocks, you have a problem that if you take 2 samples from the same formation and you conduct the experiments, you might get different results because no 2 rocks are the same. So, so how good have the results been in these micromodel experiments? Well, they've been very promising. We've actually already validated our platform against the literature, and we've shown that our synthetic rocks already behave like real rocks. And not only that, but we've also shown mechanisms that people have never observed before with the naked eye. Furthermore, We've tested enhanced oil recovery fluids that have never been tested before due to the sheer cost of traditional experiments, because these things are very, very cheap compared to those traditional experiments. So with the use of these micromodels, we're understanding the physics of multi-phase flow better, and we're trying to get that 70% of the oil that we leave behind. Thank you.
Simone, hi, how are you? Good. There you go. Okay, we have thumbs up. Simone.
I like the little girl in the center of the group, but if taken, any of the others will do. So wrote a forgotten hand on a scrap of newspaper in 1934. And that relic that's up there on this slide is a relic of a public policy of the forced removal of Indigenous children from their families in Australia. We call these children the stolen generation. And 10 years ago, the Prime Minister of Australia apologised to them and their families for what was done. And after he offered his apology, he said, "I hope that this apology is accepted in the spirit of reconciliation in which it is offered." He cited the value of forgiveness, and he talked about a new beginning for Australia. A new beginning. Forgiveness. Reconciliation. What would it take for these children to forgive the government for what was done to them? And why should they? So these are the questions that started me down this path. And when I started reading about forgiveness, I learned that activists and scholars think that it might be a really promising approach in countries troubled by historic wrongs, countries like Australia. They see it as the natural end goal of things like public apologies, of things like truth and reconciliation commissions. There is no future without forgiveness, said South Africa's Desmond Tutu as he anticipated collective forgiveness that would heal the nation. And this all sounded really appealing to me. But as I read, I struggled to understand what was going on with this concept. I found that advocates rarely paused to define forgiveness, and that when they used it, sometimes they seemed to mean different things by it. And as a philosopher trained in conceptual analysis, this troubled me. And so I asked myself, is there one common concept of forgiveness that we can all agree on? And is collective forgiveness possible? Is this something that's capable of being a group act? Can the stolen generation forgive as a group? And finally, I wondered about, if all of these things are possible, what about the appropriateness of a state asking people like these children for forgiveness? Is that something that conforms with our ideas of justice? And so these are the questions I set myself in my dissertation. First of all, I do that conceptual work. I define forgiveness. Then I ask this question of the collective possibility of forgiveness, and it doesn't look good. And then finally, I turn to this question of the appropriateness of a government that asks its people for their forgiveness. And it turns out that forgiveness is this odd thing that's perfectly appropriate in private moral life, but that carries all these connotations of partiality, of arbitrariness, of private intuitions that don't translate well to the public sphere. And so, respectfully, I say, let's not ask these children for their forgiveness. No future for forgiveness in the public realm.
That's our first bell. Sorry, Aaron, you had to push the bell. All right. Hi, how are you?
Let me start my talk with a quick poll. Raise your hand if you've ever been stuck in a congestion on a freeway. Come on, we need all hands up. It's worse, we know that. Keep your hands up if you have ever used express lanes or toll lanes to move faster during the congestion. Good number. Express lane is the primary element of my thesis, which are toll lanes where people pay toll to move faster during congestion. They promote carpooling and transit usage because you pay a lower rate, and also they provide reliable travel time, like in the times of emergency when you need to make that doctor's appointment on time. But how do toll operators keep managed lane congestion free? The answer is dynamic pricing. You change toll rate with time so that the inflow of people on express lanes is reduced or managed. This is where my thesis comes in. The current dynamic pricing algorithms, which control the inflow of on managed lanes or express lanes, use heuristics which are not optimal for system performance. They raise toll when congestion is going up, bring it down when congestion is going down, and most of these heuristics are very local in nature and do not perform well on complex managed lane networks like the one shown there. So the research objective of my work is to formulate scalable algorithms which perform better than current heuristics and that can work well on complex managed lane networks or express lane networks. So the way we do it is two ways. First, we formulate a model which explains how controlling toll prices impact system performance, and then we develop an improved algorithm that improves system performance by having an updated toll. Why do we do better? Because we exploit the information of how traffic flows and how drivers make decisions to make improved choices. Our simulations on multiple test networks show promising results. For the LBJ express lanes in Dallas, Texas, we generate 48 to 200% more revenue throughout a 1 day of period, which this revenue can be directed towards improving the existing infrastructure. Our algorithm saves each traveler, and I emphasize each, 30 to 60 seconds in 1 hour of travel, which is a lot of time if you accumulate it over a system, which can lead to lower vehicular emissions and more satisfied customers. So as part of my dissertation work, I'm looking at how to improve system performance using better tolling algorithms. What's next for me? I need to improve these algorithms using real-time data and involve more practitioners to give me feedback on how, when this implemented in practice, how will it perform, so that we can make travel during congestion much more easier for people. Thank you.
Okay, our judge is ready. Okay, Javier, it's yours.
2 years ago, with the Paris Agreement, the world pledged to limit global warming to be 2 degrees Celsius compared to pre-industrial times. However, it's been shown that it's impossible to limit the world's emissions to reach this goal. It is necessary to start producing negative emissions. The numbers show that in order to achieve this goal, we have to get rid of 810 billion tons of atmospheric CO2, which is worth more or less 25 years of emissions at the current rate. There's only one feasible solution so far, and it's called CO2 capture and sequestration. This process grabs pollutants from the atmosphere and it stores them in safe places. For example, in depleted petroleum reservoirs miles below the ground. In here, they can be stored by the action of capillary forces. These reservoirs
are, are, are porous rocks that they look like the one in the image to our right. They have individual minerals that constitute them. In the past, scientists thought that these minerals didn't conflict with the fluids traveling around them. But recent advances in microscopy techniques have shown that each individual mineral possesses a distinct affinity with the fluids we're injecting. So during my graduate studies, I have been investigating the effect of the shapes of these minerals with the fluids around them. To do this, I created a simulator that mimics the interaction between the fluid molecules and the mineral surfaces. This simulator has to mimic billions of particles in order to get a representative sample. So this has to be coded in high-performance computing languages and has to be deployed in a supercomputational facility. The results so far, we have been able to capture the complex interaction between the solid matter and the fluids around them. We have shown that when the minerals have a size that's comparable to the size of the pores of the depleted reservoirs, there could be blockages in this reservoir, making much smaller the quantity of CO2 that we can store in these places. My research is relevant because I'm providing for the first time in literature a simplified model to calculate the amount of pollutants that we can store in a given reservoir. Thank you.
Okay, last contestant for third heat, Salma, floor is yours.
A lot of you might think that the key to a broken heart is a big, shiny ring. And that might be true, but the question is, will it last forever? My doctoral work focuses on a similar question, but the ring is just a little different. Heart valves control unidirectional blood flow in the heart during the cardiac cycle. Over the past 5 years, I worked on the mitral valve, an atrioventricular valve located on the left side of the heart, one of the more mechanically demanding environments of the cardiovascular system. The clinical driver is mitral regurgitation, a condition that affects more than 50,000 people in the US alone per year. The solution? Mitral valve repair, a surgical technique in which a stabilizing device, known as an annuloplasty ring, is sutured around the annulus to restore normal leaflet coaptation and motion. But the problem is, this does not last. In fact, there is a high recurrence rate of regurgitation over time. As a matter of fact, 3 to 5 years after the surgery, there is a 60% rate of repair failure. Why does this happen? Several studies have led this repair failure back to excessive tissue stresses. My work is focused on what happens in between, what leads to this tissue remodeling, and what happens at the cell level. So to answer these critical questions, I chose to follow a multi-scale approach where I use organ-level simulations and in vivo tissue-level deformations to answer critical questions on what happens at the cell level. I designed and developed bioreactor systems that allow me to answer these questions using experiments in the lab in controlled in vitro settings. I then used an integrated experimental computational approach to link these experiments and our experimental results to what actually happens in vivo in the body. The result? A simple tool that allows us to predict surgical outcome. using a simple metric, cell deformation. Now I hope that all of you remember this before you go out and buy that ring before Valentine's Day. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Do we have any other contestants that have not gone? Okay. Great job, everybody. We are going to take a break and go into the deliberation room. What time is it? 10 after 10? We will come back as soon as we can, I guess, but I would say it would be at least 11 o'clock, sometime between 11 and 11:30, but I'll try to make sure that most people are in the room before we do that. How many of you need to leave and come back, or are you just going to hang out? Who's going to leave? Going to leave? Okay. So if you leave, make sure you leave your name with Danielle so we can make sure we contact you about the results, okay? Otherwise, we'll just see you back in here for the announcement. Okay. How's it going? You getting mean texts back? All right. So I think we're probably back streaming live, and just so that everybody is aware of who's moving forward into the final heats from heat number 3, David Miller will be going forward, Alon Kirchner, Sabina, and Sabina, I'm sorry, I can't say your last name, but you're the only Sabina we have. Manusha, you'll be going forward. Manushi, you'll be going forward. And Salma. Salma, Manushi, Sabina, Alon, and David. All of you will be going forward to the final, so please arrive in the auditorium no later than 20 minutes until 2. Thank you so much.